Hello, good morning, and welcome. It's Tuesday, September the 16th, and it seems Keir Starmer just can't catch a break these days. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's. And here's the deal. Give us 20 minutes and we'll tell you everything you need to know about how the day will play out in British politics. We've got plenty of stuff you won't hear elsewhere today. Now, the Prime Minister's having such a torrid time. He's hoping that Donald Trump's arrival, the President touches down at Stansted at 8:30 this evening, will help turn things around. And boy, does he need that help. But Anne, there's something that feels like it captures this whole situation that you've discovered about that moment of touchdown for Donald Trump.
Yes, Sam, I've been following the plans and the prep from the horse's mouth, or rather from close to the horse guards and those who are taking part in this big ceremonial when Donald Trump arrives. And there's music, Sam, that is played as Machine 1 touches down, and there's a big walk past the walled garden. It's what you'd expect up to a point. Lots of Philip Sousa, those rousing American marches to make him feel at home, pomp and circumstance from Elgar, and drop intro from Madness, Our House, which I think sounds like immense fun. And Madness will therefore blur out. Let's hope it gets the presidential toes tapping. Whether you see that as a reference to the rather grand Our House in the middle of Windsor Park, or as something a bit more in the air at the moment in politics generally, it's up to you.
Well, that feels it catches British and American politics all in one there. It is pretty much madness. It feels like quite a lot, but not in an upbeat Suggs way. Let's go through all the reasons why Keir Starmer, after yesterday, needs a better day today.
The plans to deport migrants back to France on that one-in, one-out deal was supposed to go ahead yesterday, but there was a last-minute human rights challenge, so that didn't happen. Will it go ahead this week at all? Meanwhile, another key aide, Paul Ovenden, the head of strategy, has resigned from Number 10 over lurid messages that surfaced 8 years after he wrote them. We've got a 3-hour debate in Parliament on why Peter Mandelson was appointed to Washington as ambassador and the circumstances around his resignation. The Prime Minister gave an interview to Channel 4 yesterday, insisting that he would fight to the next election, and crucially, he felt the need to do that.
It just is accumulating, isn't it? Each Monday feels like there's a mini reset day at the moment, but each week that mini reset just fails. Just on the departure of that Number 10 aide, we'll come back to some of the wider politics of it, but that will really, really hurt. Paul Ovenden was one of the closest advisors there was to Keir Starmer. Absolutely not a household name, but I think we're probably talking in the top 3 most important people, alongside Morgan McSweeney, Steph Driver, who did communications, and Stuart Ingham, who does policy. Just there aren't many long marches. It's a feature of Keir Starmer's way of running a team, but he just doesn't have a great deal of people who've been with him for a long time. But Paul was one of them. Paul's also the right-hand guy of Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's chief of staff, so very much part of one wing of the Labour Party. I'm sure most listeners haven't heard of him, but take it from me that I feel like that rupture is going to be felt very keenly on a personal level by the Prime Minister, on a personal level, much more than the departure of Peter Mandelson, by the way, which I think is a political mess, but not a personal sort of sore. And so I think that when the Prime Minister looked irritable and red-faced during that Channel 4 interview, I suspect it was because simultaneously all the stuff with Ovenden was going on at that moment.
Wow. And not much consolation, but at the same time, Tory woes are considerable because the defection of the latest big name to Reform UK feels like an important marker, and that is Danny Kruger, certainly one of the big thinkers over many, many years under different Conservative leaderships. He has gone to Nigel Farage's party saying the Tories have failed and his new political home is the real torch of conservatism. And for me, this feels like a more significant moment, Sam, than the defection pattern that we've seen in a lot of recent jumpers welcomed to reform from the Tory ranks. But Kruger has been so important in so many debates across a range of topics. Recently, we've heard a lot from him against assisted dying. And the fact that he has that pedigree going back for such a long time, that is a real scalp for Nigel Farage.
Yeah, he's quite the orator as well. He is, by the way, the first sitting Tory MP to defect all the way over to Reform UK. Thanks, Henry. So I feel like this is a big moment. Now, it's Tuesday, so we've got the weekly YouGov Sky Times voting intention poll. It makes tough reading for the two traditionally biggest parties. Reform UK are on top. They're on 29%. That's up 2 on the week. Labour on 20%, down 2. Conservatives on 17, no change. Lib Dems on 15. Greens on 10. To me, the significance of this week's voting intention is Labour on 20%. That's its joint lowest this year in 2025. And that's because Keir Starmer's woes feel pretty inescapable, and that isn't going to help. Now, if you were to put a little bit of form on the problems facing the Prime Minister, I think there's no better place to turn than the chronicler of this era of the Labour Party. That's the impeccably connected Patrick Maguire, author and Times columnist, and also, frankly, just one of the best writers in the country. He has written in today's Times that Keir Starmer's government has, quote, the unmistakable stench of decay, and, quote, now people are openly questioning Starmer's leadership. Now, given who he speaks to in Number 10 and how well sourced he is, that coming from him will hurt.
Yeah, roger that. And the embattled Prime Minister chairing a cabinet meeting this morning, that is going to be a very awkward affair, isn't it, considering these high-level briefings about his future playbook, our playbook from Politico picks up on those. And something does seem to have changed quite quickly, which is that even people who at one point would have said, oh, come on, governments have their ups and downs and we're just had got a bit of trouble not coming as single spies at the moment, are ashen-faced. And I think that is also what you're reflecting there from that excellent piece by Patrick Maguire. So it's a kind of trio of woes, really, at least. We have open speculation about whether Keir Starmer could face a leadership challenge. Some people talking about the May elections, or maybe even sooner. Then there is the subject, obviously, that everything that hangs around the state visit, and does that go according to plan? And then, of course, there's a fallout from Peter Mandelson, and now another resignation in Downing Street, as you point out, Sam, close and much more personally close to Keir Starmer. And you have also come across somewhere in your truffling about that tells us something about how a challenge could look, which quite surprised me, so might surprise someone else as well.
Yeah, I've tripped over this kind of incredible subplot about the Labour leadership and a Labour leader under fire that I had no idea about. So if I can be blunt, bookmark what I'm about to tell you, because I have. So did you know, Anne, that in the last 12 months, the Labour Party has actually made it easier for sitting MPs to oust a sitting Labour Prime Minister? I couldn't quite believe this either when I was told about it last night. The Labour rulebook has been updated after a change at last year's conference, and the 2025 Labour rulebook is different to the 2024 one on how to get rid of a leader.
And I'm just going to jump in there and say, you what? Because usually these rule books get updated to make it harder to get rid of the leader. So I know it's early doors, but unless I'm mishearing you, it's going the other way.
That's right. So it used to be the case that if you wanted to challenge a sitting Labour Prime Minister, it could only happen at conference. And then a rival candidate, the kind of thing that we would have once called a stalking horse, would need to be found, and 20% of Labour MPs, that's 80 in the current parliamentary party, would have to put their names against nominations for that stalking horse. But that meant that there was only a tiny window each year where a challenge could happen. But at conference last year, completely below the radar, Number 10 barreled in and demanded a change. Now, they thought they were being really clever at this point, because the politics felt very, very different a year ago. And where Number 10 then felt the danger lay was a very different place. So there was also the ability back a year ago for conference basically the unions to pass a motion which could challenge a Labour Prime Minister. And they thought in number 10, this was the problem. So number 10 basically pushed through a rule change that took some power away from the unions, but handed it to MPs. So here's the new rule. If you have a rival candidate who you want to stand against the Prime Minister and 80 MPs who back them, you can challenge a sitting Labour MP at any point in the year, at any point in his premiership. Now, this creates so much more jeopardy. Now, I understand number 10 were warned not to do this rule change, but pressed ahead anyway. There are people pulling out their hair saying they literally didn't have the foresight to see the implications of what they were doing. They were told it was risky. But right now, if there are 80 MPs wanting to do a challenge, they can under the rules at any point. And this, we had years of the spectre of MPs on the Tory side going to the chair of the 1922 to put in their letters. There is now a similar process created 12 months ago under the radar that can be used to oust a sitting Labour Prime Minister. And I have to say, walking around Portcullis House, you can find plenty, dozens of very unhappy Labour MPs and many more than 100, for instance, backing the kind of non-government candidate for deputy leadership. I know that's a different thing, but this causes a problem. This rule change is quite a big deal, and I'm surprised that they've gone through with it because it means that we are going to have to watch MPs very closely to see whether they are coordinating about this throughout the Parliament.
How many times have we run around, Sam, in Westminster trying to find out how many Tory letters disaffected Conservative MPs had gone in there to the 1922 committee to force a change of leader, or at least force a contest. And this was seen, I think, in Labour as a bit of a strange Tory pastime, arisen for historic reasons, but also a bit the decentralised nature of the Conservative Party. And I remember, actually, I think it was a Labour former Prime Minister, no less, sort of saying, this is the craziest system. You should never get involved with anything like this because you have to grip the process by which not only obviously you elect leaders, but when times are tough, that there has to be that insulation that stops kind of fire and fury just sweeping through your back benches. It does sound, as you say, like there has been something of a miscalculation here, or at least a kind of one-eyed preoccupation with let's save Keir Starmer from any possible challenge from the unions, not to see that it could come around so quickly and so vociferously as we're both and all hearing at the moment.
Well, it's just something we're going to have to keep an eye on all the way through the Parliament, because I'm not saying that there is a stalking horse yet, but they have created the ability to basically create one. The problem for Keir Starmer is that he's just facing insurrection in a lot of places at the moment. And, you've got anger amongst MPs not being listened to, but by and large, people who are working in government were just getting on with the job. But one of the really striking things that's happened in the last 24 hours is that has actually changed. And it changed with the departure of that aide that we were just talking about, Paul Ovenden. So before I explain why I think that this is a bit of a line in the sand moment, and do you want to just run through what happened with Ovenden?
Yeah, so this goes back to an inappropriate conversation, as Ovenden has himself admitted, that he had with female colleagues when he was working as a Labour press officer in 2017, so before Keir Starmer was leader. And these messages discussed a sex act in a sort of jokey, in a sort of game way, involving Abbott. It was a joke, but it was in very poor taste. He has said in a statement, it was a silly conversation I was party to with other female staff members, I think underlining that he wasn't just driving this conversation with something of a sort of parlour game. The messages are thought to be part of a huge cache of emails, etc., that were leaked. And this is, I think, where the tinderbox effect comes into play here. Because one, to speak up here for Diane Abbott, who was the butt of this joke at this time, that leaves a bit of an unpleasant taste in the mouth. There's clearly been huge argument, beef over the years between the Corbyn faction and the right of the party. This was probably a bit influenced by that, or at least that's my impression, Sam. But at the same time, the unpleasant jokes or jokes that could be read as sexist are not simply to be passed over lightly. The question is whether this is a sign of more to come. And there was a scoop from ITV's Shahab Khan coming from a book called The Fraud by journalist Paul Holden. Actually, desperately trying to get their hands on that, wondering if there could be yet more where this came from, because Paul Ovenden, you have reflected, I think, a very respected figure around Keir Starmer. This is not just one unforced error by him that's now come to light. This feels like skeletons tumbling out of a closet.
So it's part of a cache of messages that were leaked from the internal Labour Party messaging system a few years ago that have already partially been aired, but this is another dimension of them. They've been kicking around in the media, these messages, for some months. We learned that Newsnight had them, and potentially Channel 4, but they finally come out yesterday. Here's why I think this moment matters, and this is absolutely not to pass judgment on the messages themselves, but simply to talk about the politics today of how it's landed. Now, whenever you have a resignation in these circumstances, normally people accept what's happened and move on. That isn't happening in the normal way right now. Now, I mentioned that MPs are unhappy, but until now, for instance, government aid, political aids have been going along with the business of government. I think there is shock and dismay amongst them at Paul Ovenden's departure because he was such a key figure. And they've actually effectively gone on the offensive against his departure. People are saying, government aides are saying, Keir Starmer should have ripped up the resignation. And they are issuing statements in support of Paul Ovenden. One of them said that Paul was one of the very few people to continually cut through the noise and recognise our once-in-a-generation opportunity to change this country. He's a hero, and I've just removed the swear word. Another one said, the most talented spad in government and leader to so many others, no public profile, no self-aggrandising, and nothing but an immediate recognition that there was a prospect of damage to the PM, a total class act. Now, I mentioned that not to heap praise on Paul, though that's their intention, but because we have people in government basically sort of openly defying the PM over this. And the number 10 line is that the messages were appalling, and of course he had to go. But here we have people releasing statements in government saying he's a hero. And I think that only happens when people are very, very cross. I did speak to somebody in another bit of government who said that these individuals were briefing against the principle. That man is in charge of the country. Have a bit of respect. You're now announcing to the national press you don't agree with the Prime Minister's line that you guys put out there. This has gone too far. There needs to be a full clear out. So the row over Ovenden, I think, marks a kind of breach in trust between bits of government and the top of number 10. That is the thing that makes it very dangerous. Or to put it much more crudely, you don't want to piss off your political advisors, particularly on the eve of a conference where you're making them pay for their own hotel rooms. Apparently, the party's only paying 50% of their accommodation. The people that spin and try and get you good PR are the people now, as of today, feeling very put out. And that is not a great position for a government trying to reset to be in. So on that cliffhanger, we're going to leave it. We've actually been battling Anne's hotel Wi-Fi this morning, so we can't get a final thought from her. But we will be back tomorrow for Wednesday's Politics at Sam and with both of us in full flow. Look forward to seeing you then.